If you are 58 years old and someone tells you that automating $200 a week is the secret to a wealthy retirement, that is not really advice. It is a math problem built for someone else's timeline. The ladders and levels you see online sort people from broke to rich in 6 neat steps. Most of them are written for someone with 30 years to climb. If you are standing at level 4 today and you follow that same standard playbook, you can trigger a Centrelink assets test trap that leaves you with less spendable cash each fortnight than a retiree sitting quietly at level 2. That is the trap I want to walk you through today. We are breaking down the 6 levels of wealth in retirement for the 2026 Australian system, level by level, so you can see exactly where you sit right now. More importantly, I want to show you the catch-up math for people who do not have 30 years left. Maybe you have 10 years, maybe you have 10 months. The mechanics still work, but only if you understand which lever moves at your stage. We are going to start at level 1. And I want to be upfront about something most finance content skips over. The real cost there is not just the dollar figure. It is what I would call the social cost, the quiet loss of dignity that comes with counting out coins for the parking meter. I have watched this happen up close, and it changes how a person carries themselves in a room before it ever shows up on a bank statement. Stick with me through all 6 levels, because the moves that get you from level 1 or 2 to somewhere safer are not the moves you would make if you had 30 years to spare. If any of this sounds like it might be describing where you are standing right now, subscribe, because we are going to keep working through exactly what the 2026 rules mean for people on our timeline, not a 30-year-old's timeline. Right now, the maximum age pension for a single person sits at $1,200.90 a fortnight. Work that out over a year, and it lands around $31,223. That is not a poverty statistic on a chart. That is the number a lot of people are trying to run an entire life on, including rego, insurance, and whatever the dentist wants this year. Level 1 is what I call pension only. There is no super cushion sitting underneath it, or barely any. Level 2 is Pension Plus, where someone has scraped together a super balance, often somewhere under $100,000 sitting on top of a part or full pension. On paper, that sounds like progress. In practice, it often buys very little breathing room. Here is the part that does not show up in a spreadsheet. At level 1, you are not just tightening a budget. You are losing optionality, the ability to say yes to things without doing mental arithmetic first. I have watched that show up on someone's face before it ever shows up in their bank balance. It is a version of retirement built on sausages and mash, not because anyone chose that meal, but because the stress of the next electricity bill has already been written into the way they hold themselves in a room. Most people entering retirement in Australia right now sit somewhere in this level 1 to level 2 range, well short of the ASFA comfortable benchmark. That is not a personal failure. It is closer to the default outcome of a super system that only really compounds hard if you started saving decades earlier or had years of consistent full-time income behind you. The safety of a full pension comes at a cost few people say out loud. You never build a cushion large enough to absorb a bad year, a hot water system that dies in winter, or 6 weeks in respite care after a fall. That is the invisible price of staying at level 1, paid quietly, year after year. Here is the trap that catches people trying to climb out. Someone at level 2 hears the standard advice, save more and watch it grow, and starts stacking cash and shares outside the home. What they usually do not realize is that the assets test has its own taper built in. For every extra $1,000 held in assessable assets above the threshold, the pension gets trimmed by roughly $78 a year. That is a 7.8% annual haircut on savings that are just sitting there before the money has done anything for you at all. So the same instinct that works at 30, just keep saving, can quietly slow someone down at 60. which raises the real question for level 3, because that is where most people assume they are finally safe. They are not, and the reason has almost nothing to do with how much super they have. ASFA defines a comfortable retirement for a single person as roughly $54,840 a year. The number most guides throw around to get there is a super balance near $630,000 by the time you retire. That figure gets repeated so often it starts to sound like a finish line. It is not, and the gap between the number and the reality depends on one detail almost nobody puts in the headline. That detail is whether you own your home outright. The standard $630,000 figure assumes you do. If you are renting in Sydney or Melbourne heading into retirement, that same balance can function more like a level 1 retirement because rent eats straight through the margin that was supposed to make you comfortable. Run the numbers side by side. A homeowner with $54,840 a year in income keeps essentially all of it for living expenses. A renter pulling that same $54,840, paying something like $35,000 a year in rent in a capital city, is left with around $19,840 to cover food, insurance, transport, and everything else. That is below what a single person on the full pension alone is living on right now. Same nest egg, same ASFA label, two completely different lives. And the difference is not a lifestyle choice. It is a fixed cost that never lets up. There is a reason the ASFA modelling defaults to homeownership. The age pension system is built the same way, treating the family home as exempt from the assets test, no matter its value. While the system was never really designed around people still paying rent well into their 70s, that gap has only become more visible as fewer people over 55 own their home outright than a generation ago. This is the part I got wrong for a long time. I used to tell people the ASFA numbers were the gold standard, the number to aim for, and then stop worrying. I was wrong. For the growing number of Australians in their late 50s and 60s who never got onto the property ladder or sold the family home during a divorce, that number is closer to a dangerous lie than a target. The honest version of the calculation adds the real cost of housing across the rest of your life, not just this year's rent. If you expect to rent for another 25 years, you are effectively carrying a second mortgage that never gets paid off, one that comes straight out of retirement income instead of wages. That is, the cost nobody puts on the poster. Comfortable on paper can still mean thin in practice, and the only way to see it clearly is to build your own number instead of borrowing ASFA's. If you own your home outright and you have hit level 3, you are in a genuinely safer position. But safer is not the same as safe, because there is one more test coming that catches homeowners and renters alike, and it shows up the moment health becomes the bigger expense than lifestyle, often faster and harder than anyone budgeted for. Level 4 is the self-funded stage, somewhere between $1,100,000 and $1,500,000 in assets. Cross that line as a couple, and you are typically past the assets test cutoff point of $1,102,500, which means the age pension drops away completely. You have built something real. You have also stepped off a safety net that used to catch part of the fall. Here is the scenario that catches level 4 retirees off guard. Picture retiring with your balance sitting mostly in the market. And within the first year, that market drops 20%. If you are drawing down the standard 5% a year, regardless of what the market did, you are selling assets while they are cheap, locking in a loss you can never fully claw back, because every dollar you sell during a downturn is a dollar that cannot recover once prices come back up. The alternative is not complicated, it just has to be set up before the drop happens. Keep 2 to 3 years of living expenses sitting in cash or a high-interest account, separate from the growth assets. When the market falls, you draw from that cash bucket instead of selling shares at the bottom. and you let the growth assets sit untouched until prices recover. It is a timing tool, not a prediction tool. Nobody knows when the next drop happens. The bucket just means you are not forced to sell into it. There is a genuine silver lining buried in the 2026 numbers. Deeming rates have climbed to as high as 3.25%, which means cash sitting in that bucket is finally earning something worth having again after years of near zero returns. The catch is that if you are still receiving a part pension, that same cash gets deemed as income, which can quietly shrink your payment, even while it is protecting you from a market crash. The tool that saves you on one test can cost you on another. This is the real reason Level 4 feels shakier than the balance suggests. Nobody warns you that becoming self-funded also means becoming self-insured against a bad first few years, with no part pension sitting underneath to soften a downturn the way it would have at Level 2 or Level 3. The cash bucket is not a luxury at this level. It is the thing standing between a rough patch and a permanent hole in your retirement. Reaching Level 4 puts you ahead of most people your age. But the next level brings a different kind of problem. Because once the money itself stops being the worry, the tax office starts looking a lot more interesting. Level 5 starts around $2,500,000 and Level 6 sits at $5 million and beyond. At this stage, the conversation changes completely. You are no longer asking whether you will run out of money. You are managing the transfer balance cap, currently $2,100,000, which limits how much you can move into a tax-free retirement pension account before the excess gets taxed differently. Once the basics are covered, a lot of people at this level start thinking about their kids. The instinctive move is to hand over $50,000 or so toward a house deposit. It feels generous and simple. It is also one of the least efficient ways to move money between generations because it does nothing to shelter that money from tax once it lands in your child's hands, and it does nothing for their own retirement position either. There is a quieter option that does more with the same dollars. If your adult child has a total super balance under $500,000, they likely have unused concessional contribution cap sitting there from the last 5 years, going unused every year it is not touched. Gift them the cash. They make a personal contribution using that carried forward cap and claim it as a tax deduction. And a single contribution near the 2026 to 2027 cap of $32,500 can save them upwards of $10,000 in income tax that year alone, while the money compounds inside super and can grow past $250,000 by the time they retire. The trade-off is real, and I will not pretend it is not. Money that goes into your child's super stays locked away until their own retirement, not sitting in a house deposit you can see and touch. What you get in return is a double benefit. Most families never work through, their tax bill drops now, and your own assessable assets drop too, which can protect or restore part of your age pension eligibility, depending on where you are sitting. I do not know your family's situation, and I am not a tax advisor sitting across from your specific numbers. But I have sat with enough people at this level to know that watching your kids struggle while you are sitting on a surplus is a weight most Australians do not want to carry quietly. None of this works as a one-size-fits-all script. It works because you already have more than you need for your own runway, and the levers that got you to level 5 or level 6 are the same levers your kids have not had time to pull yet. So if you are earlier on this ladder and none of this feels like it applies yet, here is the part that actually matters for you. How do you move up from where you are right now without needing another 20 years to do it? If you are 55 or older, the first lever is the downsizer contribution. Sell the family home and you can put up to $300,000 each into super from the proceeds on top of your normal caps. For a couple, that is up to $600,000 moving into a low tax environment in one transaction. Nothing else on this list moves the needle that fast. The second lever is the concessional cap itself, now $32,500 for the 2026 to 2027 year. If you are earning around $90,000 salary, sacrificing $150 a week barely dents that cap. The real opportunity sits in the carry-forward rule. If your total super balance is under $500,000, you can use unused cap space from the last 5 years in a single hit, turning years of missed contributions into one strong catch-up. The third lever is less obvious, and it works in the opposite direction. Say you are sitting at $1,100,000 in assessable assets as a couple, right at the point where the pension drops to zero. Spend $150,000 on a genuine home renovation, an exempt asset under the assets test, and your assessable balance falls to $950,000. That can be enough to trigger a part pension again, along with the pensioner concession card, which brings its own savings on power bills, medical costs, and council rates that add up faster than people expect. None of these three moves require 30 years of runway. They require knowing which lever exists and pulling the right one for where you are standing today. Whether that means moving money in, timing it around the cap, or spending it on the home to bring the pension back into reach. So if the information is out there, and none of this is secret, why do so many people who know all of this still do nothing with it? It is not laziness. It is something closer to fear. Knowing the levers is not the same as pulling one, and there is a reason for that gap. In your 30s, a bad financial decision is a lesson you shrug off and correct over the next decade. In your 60s, the same size mistake can feel like a sentence, because there may not be another decade left to fix it. That fear is not irrational. It makes complete sense to freeze when the money in front of you is the only nest egg you are ever going to build, and every choice feels permanent in a way it never did at 35. If you have spent months circling a decision without acting, that is not a character flaw. That is a normal response to genuinely higher stakes. The way out is not to fix everything at once. Do not try to sort out tax, super, and estate planning in the same month, because that is exactly the kind of overload that keeps people stuck for another year. Pick one lever. If you have a genuine 10 years left before you need this money, that might be as simple as checking whether your super is sitting in a default, conservative option when it could be in a growth option, actually built for a decade-long horizon. One lever, move deliberately, beats 3 levers you are too overwhelmed to touch. Once that first move is made, the next one gets easier because you have proof it did not blow up your life. Let us bring this back to where you actually stand. Retirement was never a finish line you cross once and forget about. It is a 6-level ladder, and most people move up and down it more than once, as life happens, health changes, and markets do what markets do. Whether you are at level 1 fighting to hold on to some dignity in the weekly budget, or sitting at level 6 working out how to pass wealth on without wasting it, the 2026 rules around super, the age pension, and the assets test are not obstacles built to trip you up. They are tools, and most of them work harder in your favor than people assume. You have more choices available to you right now than it probably feels like. What is true is that optionality shrinks a little more each year you wait to use it, not because you did anything wrong, but because time is the one input none of us can add back. If this helped you work out exactly where you are standing on that ladder, subscribe to Aussie Retirement with Bob. We will keep working through what these 2026 changes actually mean for people on our timeline.